Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Guarding Your Network Against Security Breaches and Botnets, brought to you by Light Reading and CloudMark and broadcast by United Business Media Limited. I'm Lenny Liebman. I'll be your moderator today, and I'm just going to make a few announcements before we begin. First of all, I want to let you know that this webinar is going to include some audience polling, and we'd love to have you all please participate in that. The polling questions will appear in the slide presentation window, and we just ask that you please complete the polls when they appear and make sure you click on that Submit Answer button in the polling slide window. And again, if you all participate, we'll get a statistically significant sample. Also, we're planning on having a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but you don't have to wait until that session begins to ask your questions. You can do that at any time during the webinar. Just type your question as soon as it occurs to you into the Q&A text area located there to the right of the presentation window, and again, make sure you click the Submit button. By the way, at this time we recommend that you disable your pop-up blockers, and we really encourage you to take advantage of the access you have to a subject matter expert today and, in fact, submit a question. The slides will advance for you automatically throughout the event. You can also download a copy of the slides at any time by clicking on the Additional Resources button that you see located below the presentation window. And finally, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please just visit our webinar help guide by clicking on that help link below the presentation window. And in addition, you can contact our technical support helpline that's also located in that guide. So now on to today's presentation, Guarding Your Network Against Security Breaches and Botnets. We're very fortunate to have discussing today's topic Kent Brake, who's a senior systems architect with CloudMark. Kent has more than 15 years of experience in the Internet and mobile messaging industry. He's focused on designing and implementing scalable and secure solutions for telecommunications companies globally. So that includes projects at Google, T-Mobile, Virgin, AT&T, GoDaddy, and many others. He's been at CloudMark for about 7 years, and right now in his role as a senior systems architect, Kent has served as the primary architect on a variety of large ISP web hosting and mobile solutions deployment, and he's really, really familiar with this topic. So with that introduction, Kent, why don't you go ahead and get started?
All right, thanks, Lenny. As Lenny said, my name's Kent Brake. I've been with CloudMark for 7 years as a senior architect, where I help ISPs secure their networks. Before CloudMark, I held messaging-focused engineering roles at Google and Critical Path. The agenda to today's webinar is how and why hosts and accounts become compromised, effects on subscribers and ISP networks, identifying compromised hosts, account, and botnets, mitigating strategies, and inoculation and takedown strategies. So cybercriminals can go after any set of hosts on the Internet. Why do they target ISP networks? The main reasons are corporate and government computing resources are better protected than end-user hosts. Broadband connections offer great networking performance. The reputation of ISP space is considered less malicious than dedicated servers. Many subscribers run out-of-date software, like XP. There's no security operations center watching over subscribers' machine, unlike corporate and government networks. Most end-user connections and machines are always online. The sheer number of potential hosts that can be infected, these reasons are too numerous for cybercriminals to pass up. So how are ISPs accounts compromised? Phishing is one of the primary ways subscriber ISP accounts and other account information is stolen. These personally addressed email messages attempt to trick the end user into revealing their credentials. Social networks are data mined to extract relationships that identify social links to help the phishers trick the subscriber. Things like, I know your LinkedIn network, now I phish them as you. Phished accounts are then used by cyber criminals to infect more subscribers or send more socially engineered phishing messages, botnet binaries, and plain old spam. ISPs that host web pages for their customers are another vector of attack. Hosted websites are increasingly the target of cyber criminals. The cuckoo spammers have become very successful at this. By compromising respected sites, running certain versions of Joomla and WordPress plugins, or by brute force password attacks on WordPress, they've compromised over 111,000 domains since March of 2013, with 26,000 still under their control. They host over 1,500 pornographic landing pages while sending enormous amounts of spam to make a profit. So how do botnets compromise hosts? Email messages carrying the botnet binary as an attachment is by a large margin the most widespread. The emails will typically try to trick the user into opening an attachment by using familiar names like voicemail.spiff that spoof the from and appear to be coming from a voicemail system, or a system update appearing to come from a respected application vendor. Downloads from peer-to-peer networks are another attack vector. Popular media files or applications are typically modified to include the botnet payload. This method has a high success rate since the victim believes she is installing legitimate software, so OS application installation messages are normal and does not cause the victim to become alarmed. Drive-by downloads is the newest method being employed by cybercriminals. Criminals use compromised web hosting accounts to upload their web-based exploit kits. These exploit kits can use a wide range of known and zero-day vulnerabilities in browser-based software like Java, Adobe, etc., to infect the subscriber's machine with the botnet binary. Drive-by download links are also spread via email. This creates an ever-growing cycle of infected users by harvesting their contacts, send email links to them, which in turn send them on to their contacts, creating a cycle of infection. Now, let's talk about some of the current botnets with high infection rates. In the time that Zero Access has been in the wild, there have been a number of revisions, with modifications to its functionality, infection strategy, and persistent mechanisms on an infected machine. However, the core purpose has remained to assume full control of the machine by adding it to the Zero Access botnet and to monetize that new asset by downloading initial malware. Primarily, Zero Access is the kernel rootkit. It uses advanced techniques to hide its presence, is capable of functioning in both 32 and 64-bit flavors of Windows from a single installer, contains aggressive self-defense functionality, and acts as a sophisticated delivery of other malware. Aileron.dx is a rootkit that differs in behavior depending on whether the operating system is 32-bit or 64-bit. Aileron.dx is a component of the Win32/Aileron, a family of data-stealing Trojans. These Trojans allow an attacker to intercept incoming and outgoing Internet traffic in order to gather confidential information such as usernames, passwords, and credit card data. The Aileron Trojan may also allow an attacker to transmit malicious data to the infected computer. The Trojan may modify DNS settings on the host computer to enable the attacker to perform these tasks. Zeus is another that runs under Windows operating system. While it is capable of being used to carry many malicious and criminal tasks, it is often used to steal banking information by man-in-the-browser attacks, keystroke logging, and form grabbing. It is also used to install the CryptoLocker ransomware. Zeus is spread mainly through drive-by downloads and phishing schemes. First identified in July 2007, with its source code was posted to GitHub in May of this year. It has proven very resilient. The source code for KRP, a botnet creation kit coded by a team of at least 24 hackers who used it to relieve banks of an estimated $250 million, has also been posted online. Its publication will spawn new hybrid strains of sophisticated banking malware. Now that we know how and why hosts and accounts are compromised, let's talk about their effects. So what do cybercriminals use these compromised accounts, hosts, and botnets for? Enlarging these nefarious networks is usually their first feature. The main vector they use for propagation is email. We'll come back to this later in the presentation, if this can help us detect them. Most botnets are leased out or time-shared by cybercriminals. The cybercriminals will rent them to other cybercriminals so that they can steal banking and other financial information from the affected user, steal email and social network authentication details so that they can be sold or used to propagate more virus and phishing attacks, click fraud, which is pay-per-click advertisers are defrauded by the bot emulating users clicking on pay-per-click advertising referrals. This is a major source of revenue for cybercriminals. Distributed denial of service attacks on government and private entities are also common. Least botnets launched a DDoS attack on Estonia in 2007. And of course, sending spam. Lots of spam. So I'll turn it over to Lenny to administrate our first question.
Thanks, and thanks so much for that great quick overview of the threat scenario we're facing. And yes, the first polling question we want to ask is more like a quiz. We're wondering what our attendees think the percentage of global spam is that's driven by botnets. So when you think about, again, all of the spam that's out there, do you think it's 20% is driven by botnets, 45%, 80%, or is it upwards of 90%? And we'll just give you a second to pick which answer you think is correct. Click that Submit Answer button. And then, Kent, I'm going to take a look at what our results are, and maybe you can let us know how close our attendees were to recognizing the magnitude of the botnet threat. And let's see what we have as our results. It looks like about half picked 80% and someone as high as 95%. So who's right, Kent?
Well, it looks like the half is right. 80% is what the industry actually says is the going average.
Oh, that's great. Well, I guess we know that if we're ever on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and they ask us a botnet question, we can go to this group for our lifeline. I'm going to ask you to just go ahead and continue your presentation. I think we have a couple more polls coming up later. And I will remind, again, our attendees, if they have questions they want to ask you, to go ahead and submit them. Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, great. So here's an in-depth example of a phishing attack we recently investigated. As you can see, the intended victim receives an email message asking for them to validate their payment information by clicking on a link contained in the message. That initial URL in the message is just a redirect. This permits the attacker to hide the actual account capturing web page. The redirect also helps the attacker thwart detection. The victim finally is redirected to an account stealing web page, which itself is hosted on a compromised account. So the negative effects from these activities are far-ranging. For subscribers, having their identity stolen can be a life-altering event, causing severe financial difficulties. The subscriber is typically responsible for the fraudulent loans and credit cards these criminals create in their name. The subscriber suffers a loss of reputation, as their contacts are infected by messages that appear to come from them. Last on the subscriber effect list is that their current credit cards and banking info is used to make fraudulent purposes that they are responsible for. For the effects on ISPs, blacklisting by other ISPs because of outbound virus and spam messages is the most common burden. Admins have to manage queues, RBLs, SMTP policy, taken away from more productive duties. The ISP's network capacity is diminished by denial of service attacks sourcing from their networks. Their DNS infrastructure is burdened by fast flux and botnet activity. Abuse reporting from subscribers and other ISPs is another productivity killer. It damages the brand's ISP, which can all add up to subscriber churn. Now that we know these attacks are and the havoc they cause, let's explore how to identify them in your network. First, compromised accounts send spam and viruses out your outbound SMTP relays. So feedback loops allow ISPs to forward their end-user spam complaints back to the source. These complaints are a great signal to identify compromised accounts. Feedback clearinghouses like ReturnPath can help simplify and broaden them. If you use signature-based anti-spam, logging the signatures of outbound messages and then post-processing them to see which ones are spam is also another signal to help identify compromised accounts. An SMTP policy engine in the outbound MTA is the best way to identify them in real time. The sender's auth account, IP, geo-IP location, and radius information can be fused together in policy to take action on messages before they leave your network. I'll turn it over to Lenny to administrate our next question.
Sure. This one's pretty simple. Kent made reference to a feedback loop, so we're just curious if any of you are actually using any feedback loops. Pretty simple binary question, but if you could let us know if you've got some feedback loops implemented in your environment in order to do this kind of detection. We'll just give you a chance again. Just answer yes or no, click Submit Answer, and we will take a look at how you guys are doing in terms of implementing that particular strategy. And it looks, Kent, like from our initial results here that almost 3/4 are not currently using any feedback loops in their defense strategy. Is that kind of what you see in the market at large, or are you seeing more adoption of this as a strategy?
We see adoption picking up because of what a great signal it provides, but this seems about to be what we think the current penetration of feedback loops actually are. But like I said, it's picking up because of botnets and the way that subscriber complaints are actually signaling botnet infections and other compromised accounts. It's being taken up quite quickly.
Good. Well, maybe this webinar will provide some impetus for our attendees to who aren't doing it yet to go ahead and adopt that. We can push that number down a little bit. But why don't you go ahead and continue with the presentation?
All right. Thanks, Lenny. So what's a botnet? A bot network, or botnet, is defined as a concerted network of bots capable of acting on instructions generated remotely. The difference between malware and botnets in that malware alone lacks the remote management found in botnets. The malicious activities of these botnets are either focused on the information on the local machine or acting to provide services for remote machines. Bots are highly customizable, so they can be programmed to do many things. The major malicious activities include, but aren't limited to, identity theft, spam, spam over internet instant messaging, spam over internet telephony, email address harvesting, distributed denial of service attacks, keylogging, fraudulent DNS farming, hosting of proxy services, fast flux hosting, hosting of illegal content, use and man-in-the-middle attacks, and click fraud. ISPs should be sure that attempts to detect the presence of bots should maintain the privacy of their personally identifiable information of their subscribers. This shouldn't block legitimate traffic in the course of bot detection and should instead employ detection methods that seek to disrupt and be transparent to subscribers and their applications. Bots that send spam through your outbound relays can be detected using the same SMTP policy techniques as we talked about for compromised accounts. Logs from your DNS recursors can be mined to correlate anomalous behavior. Spamming bots identified via SMTP policy can then have their command and control servers discovered by correlating them with these logs. Targeted net flow analysis by suspected bots can be used to identify command and control servers of the more sophisticated HTTP and peer-to-peer controlled bots. But active port scanning for known botted ports is discouraged, as these can be interpreted as an attack by the subscriber's security software. But what about bots that send directly to the Internet and not through an ISP's outbound relays? Well, since the botnets and highly organized spammers in early 2000s, many ISPs block outbound port 25 on their networks. But looking at an IP's attempting to send out port 25 to the Internet is not a good signal to indicate a bot-infected subscriber. This is because there are many legitimate reasons subscribers might attempt to send over port 25. But what if we take port 25 traffic and analyze it? It becomes a great signal for identifying botted end-user machines. Using a transparent SMTP policy engine to inspect the full content of the message can inform if it's in spam or virus, and that correlates to an infection. This is the highest quality signal for discovering bots. So I'll turn it over to Lenny to administrate our next question.
Great. So now, again, sort of simple binary question. Are you in fact collecting and analyzing traffic before blocking port 25? Again, as opposed to simply blocking it, are you using the data that you can glean from your port 25 traffic to do some kind of diagnostics regarding threats? So we'll give you just a second to answer yes or no, assuming that you actually know, and click the Submit Answer button. And then we'll take a look at what the results for our attendees are. Kent, it looks like, once again, we've got like about 2/3 of our attendees are not currently doing something that you seem to be saying is a best practice. Is this, again, does this reflect what you're seeing in the market at large?
Actually, it's a bit surprising. 32% was a little bit higher than we typically see in the market. So it's encouraging that we see this many ISPs actually analyzing this traffic. So that's a good signal that people are taking action on it.
Oh, good. Okay, and it may be that, of course, the attendees on this event are sort of disproportionately conscientious and diligent about this, because obviously they've thought of enough about it to want to come out today to attend. But that's good to know. And again, encourage them to submit more questions if they want to. And Kent, you can go ahead and continue your presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lenny. Now let's talk about ways to mitigate these vectors of attack by botnets, compromised accounts, and hosts. Beyond blocking outbound port 25 for botnet mitigation, there are 3 levels of SMTP policy sophistication that I'd like to talk about to mitigate the effects of compromised accounts and hosts. The basic approach is to impose a set of static limits on SMTP sessions as well as message and recipient limits. For SMTP sessions, you want to introduce limits on concurrent connections per IP, recipients per message, and messages per session. As for message and recipient limits, you want to limit per entity, per time interval, and per IP on a login basis, and then increase tar pits as these limits are breached. The next level of mitigation is to use a classes of service-based SMTP policy where all connecting IPs are evaluated for reputation. This evaluation process classifies an IP into one of 4 classes of service: a default class of service, which is where all IPs without reputation are initially classified into; a suspect class of service; a highly suspect class of service; and a trusted class of service. The evaluation process should classify based on answers to questions like, is the connecting IP on a major RBL? Is the geolocation of the connecting IP in an area that isn't normal for your subscribers? What percentage of spam versus the overall quantity of messages are being sent from the connecting IP? Here's an example of some of the limits on the per class of service buckets. As you can see, the class of service-based system is a guilty until proven innocent approach to SMTP policy. It goes well beyond static limits in the basic approach and allows your system to dynamically adjust to attacks coming from new and once reputable IPs. Lenny, can you advance to the next slide, please?
Sure.
Thank you. The advanced mitigation strategy takes even more reputation input to determine SMTP policy, classes of service classification. Answers to questions like, how long ago was the account created? How many different authenticated logins have I seen from this IP? How many IPs per authenticated login in a given window of time? And then content-based volumetric questions. For example, has the IP been sending messages containing certain variations of redirectors like bit.ly at a fast rate? And are they sending content that contains executable email attachments quickly? Codifying these questions into an SMTP policy gives you the best mitigation strategy. Once you've identified botnet infected subscribers, compromised accounts and hosts, we can take action to clean them up. For compromised SMTP accounts and web hosts, you will want to audit the password recovery process to ensure old passwords cannot be reused, and make sure that there's no default password set. For child email accounts, to limit the number that can be created, introduce a "Are you a human?" challenge to the creation process. And you'll also want to keep your webmail and SMTP policy tight by keeping low limits on what they can send from child accounts and a guilty until proven innocent cost-based policy. And you want to automate the retrospective reputation, so spamming accounts are taken down by customer care and accounts can be correlated with their attackers. Stopping botnets can be a complex and time-consuming task, but there are methods. Blocking botnets command and control IPs is a low-impact solution. Putting the infected subscriber into a walled garden for them to disinfect their machine is the most dramatic measure. There are many considerations that take into account when attempting this, so I recommend reading RFC 6561, Recommendations for Remediating Botnets and ISP Networks, to clear up understanding of what these challenges are. Working with industry peers is another strategy for ISPs. There are many success stories of multiple ISPs, OS vendors, and other internet companies working together to take down entire botnet CNC infrastructure. And of course, educating subscribers about the dangers of opening attachments, downloading software via peer-to-peer networks, and keeping their software up to date is very important. As the cyber arms race continues to escalate on into 2014, criminals are perpetually creating new, innovative attack methods with increased sophistication. But with good inbound and outbound SMTP policy, both inline and transparent, ISPs can not only identify bots before and compromised accounts, but they can stop them before they enter or leave their network. Would you like to know how your network measures up against others? We offer a free analysis that includes what percentage of your outbound email is spam, what percent of your IP space is being blocked, what your current worst offending IPs are, what types of spam are leaving your network, and a competitive review. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Lenny to administrate the question and answer session.
That's great, and what a great, concise overview of the problem and some potential solutions, Kent. So we really, really appreciate you sharing that with us. And we do have a question and answer session. We do have some questions that have already come in, but we have plenty of time. So I definitely encourage our attendees. This is a great opportunity that you have to ask somebody who's got some real great subject matter expertise, some insights that Kent might be able to share with you about the threat and about some solutions. Before we go to the Q&A session, I will encourage you to fill out the feedback form that should have opened on your screens. We really value this feedback from you so we can continuously improve the quality of these webcasts. So just please complete the form when you can and press the Submit Answer button. There you see at the bottom of the page. So let's get to some questions, Kent. The first one I want to ask you is, we had you talked about port 25 and analyzing the traffic as opposed to just blocking it. I think we've got one user who attendee who's suggesting that you really should just block it and forget it. Do you want to just sort of defend your position and explain why simply completely blocking the port may not be the optimal strategy?
Yeah, it's the primary reason is because if you just block port 25, you don't get any information on what is infected on your network. So the bots could be doing other nefarious things to your network, launching DNS attacks, other things that you really want to use the SMTP outbound messaging signal to identify these bots with. And so it's not advisable to just block port 25 without identifying the bots or infected machines themselves.
Gotcha. And you also made passing reference, I think, in describing some of the Trojans at the beginning as having pretty robust sort of self-defense mechanisms. Can you speak to that a little bit? And I'm particularly interested in the fact that sort of what are these self-defense mechanisms? How do they, sort of inhibit our ability to find them? And are they continually evolving? So don't we have a problem about how we're going to keep up in terms of our, counter-threat strategies?
Yes. This is one of the critical issues today. Typically, these bots are getting more sophisticated in that they have what we call polymorphic packers, to where if you're using signature-based antivirus software, the actual binaries change format. The payload stays the same, but the way the signatures are produced causes them to be masked to known AV signatures. Another way that they're actually being self-defense or being more self-defensive is that upon infection, they actually disable the antivirus software and the different firewall protections that they have enabled on the compromised machine. So this is why network correlation is one of the best methods to actually understand is the machine infected, instead of actually relying on historically normal antivirus software.
Gotcha. You also raised the issue of feedback loops, but one of our attendees is asking, aren't there certain dangers associated with feedback loops? Are you familiar with what those dangers might be or what he's referring to?
Not so much. Typically, the way that feedback loops would work would be, so say one ISP is sending a lot of outbound messages that are containing viruses and botnet binaries to another ISP, and they create a feedback loop agreement and essentially say, hey, whenever my users say this is spam or report abuse, that actual message gets redacted from the user's perspective, but it gets sent back to the originating ISP. And so the end users really don't see that feedback or have the ability to get infected because the feedback loop actually sent the message back to the ISP, because it's a back office sort of technology where it's not end user facing from a review perspective. Right. The ISPs themselves look at the feedback loop and say, hey, okay, of these messages, 19 of them actually contain the same IP containing the same botnet binary, and so it's very, very likely that this machine is actually infected.
Gotcha. Yeah, he may have also had just concerns about this notion of a sort of feedback loop generally as maybe spinning out of control. So I'm glad you clarified the nature of the feedback loop that you're specifically talking about here. You also talked about sort of the many types of attacks that botnets initiate. Is there one, or are there any that you're seeing like most often? And do you have a sense of why those kinds of attack trends are starting to emerge? Again, you kind of spoke about them generally, but is there one or two that you think are most either pernicious or most common right now? And any idea why they may be growing in that area?
The two that I touched on that actually had their source leaked, Zeus and Kyber P, because it's essentially open source bots, many other hackers have actually taken the source code and continually adapted that. And with that, you just get a standing on the shoulders of others sort of advanced in sophistication that you wouldn't get with a whole bunch of teams just working in isolation and creating their own botnet code without corroboration of others. So these are Zeus, and the ones that are open source are really, really a challenge these days.
And what about, I think a couple of times you mentioned threats that sort of run on Windows. We're pretty familiar with that. What about Macs and Linux? So what about those platforms? Are we seeing botnets there at all? Are we not seeing them? Are we seeing any trends in that area outside the Windows platform?
There was a Java exploit last year that actually did target Java applications that ran on any system, so it wasn't just Mac or Linux based, but could attack anything that was actually run in Java in the browser unprotected. So that's the major one we've seen so far, but it's still pretty limited. The main thing we see for Linux machines is actually compromised web hosting accounts, for like Joomla and these sorts of things, popular applications that end users put up to service their websites. Those have known exploits, and then those are being exposed by hackers.
Gotcha. You also made a mention sort of in passing there at the end about user education. Can you tell me any more about that? What in particular do you feel it's important to educate users about? How do you do it? Any sort of best practices that you're seeing out there in terms of what ISPs can do to educate users or customers about what's going on and how to defend themselves and be sort of part of that process of defense?
Yeah, great question. Some of the best methods that we've seen is essentially during the ISP registration process that there's actually informational messages that bullet point in good, simple terms what are internet browsing safe practices. And then they also, if they've got a good customer care team that's working with their marketing team, they include that those bullet points in incremental recurring newsletters and these sorts of things. That's really what really helps, we think, is that the continually prompting the user to think about what are the best practices when I'm on the internet, and even showing some examples of what happens when you don't do them.
Oh yeah, I think showing examples and probably that little threat or that sense of danger is probably pretty important. And you've obviously gone over it. It's a thrust of your presentation, but we still have somebody asking sort of maybe you can bottom line it or just reiterate what you think is most important. What do you see as sort of the best way to search for a botnet on your system?
The primary way is essentially monitoring outbound traffic from the machines themselves that are trying to send to the internet and through your relays, since the main propagation method is over email. There are many ways to do it. You can do it in transparent mode, where essentially you take an SMTP policy engine that can look at the incoming IP, pull in radius information and other things, and correlate those together to say, hey, this guy's totally nefarious. There's no way that they're going to send this many messages when they only send 2 or 3 per day normally. They don't send binaries, and then all of a sudden this machine's sending thousands of messages carrying binaries. To do that, you need to look at the traffic, and SMTP policy engines that can do that are the best way.
Gotcha. We have some time left. I just wonder if you want to share any remarks in closing, Kent, and maybe suggest some ways that our attendees may want to take action on some of the information that you've shared today.
Yeah, we definitely encourage monitoring your SMTP traffic, keeping your inbound stream clean. You need good SMTP policy too. If the messages don't get into your network to actually bot the machines to begin with, of course that's the best method. But once they are botted, controlling their spread to other ISPs and other subscribers, you need to really pay attention to your outbound port 25 traffic in a transparent policy way. So we can help you identify if you really are at risk, if you want to go ahead and sign up for our survey.
Great. Well, I appreciate that you answered all those questions, that you've made that suggestion, and that you've shared so much information with us. I will let our attendees know that if they're looking for more information related to today's webinar, they can visit the resource link we've just opened there. Also, within the next 24 to 48 hours, you're all going to receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. I encourage you to share that with your peers or maybe somebody you report to share this information and maybe decide to adopt some of the strategies that Kent's been talking about, and to find out what sort of CloudMark is doing in this area. And with that, I will thank you for attending today's webinar, Guarding Your Network Against Security Breaches and Botnets, which again was brought to you by Light Reading and by CloudMark. I do have to tell you that this webinar is copyright 2013 by UBM Tech, that the presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted, if that is the case, by Light Reading and CloudMark, who are solely responsible for their content, and that the individual speaker today is solely responsible for his content and for his opinions. So on behalf of Kent, I'm Lenny Liebman. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.